The letter from my mother-in-law was clear. Get out in 30 days. She needed my luxury apartment for her real son. I smiled, called the movers and cleared out everything. Every lamp, every towel, even the light bulbs. Her panic began when the doorman handed her the new keys. And a bill for $16,800. To anyone looking in, my life was a Pinterest board come to life. My name is Elena. I'm 28 and for 3 years, I lived in apartment 42B. A corner unit on the 22nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that drank in the entire city skyline. Morning light would spill across the polished concrete floors, glinting off the stainless steel appliances in our open-concept kitchen. In the evenings, the city would twinkle below like a bed of stolen stars. It was the kind of place you see in lifestyle magazines, the kind you tag in Instagram posts with #LivingTheDream. My husband, Mark, would be at his easel by the eastern window, chasing the dawn light. He was the beautiful, struggling artist to my pragmatic, successful graphic designer. He saw the world in colors and textures. I saw it in timelines, profit margins, and hex codes. We were a study in contrasts, and for a long time I believed that was what made us perfect. What no one saw, not even Mark in his artistic haze, was the silent transaction that happened on the first of every month. At 9 a.m. without fail, a digital transfer of $5,600 would glide from my private business account directly into the holdings account of the luxury buildings management company. The notification would ping softly on my phone. I'd glance at it, swipe it away, and continue with my day. This was my secret. Our secret, I suppose, though Mark's was one of blissful ignorance, and mine was one of deliberate protection. When we moved in, Mark's freelance work was inconsistent. His mother, Beverly, had always floated him, and the expectation was that she would co-sign, that her money would bridge the gap for her precious son. The thought of that woman having any formal claim to my sanctuary, my creative space, made my skin crawl. So I quietly showed the property manager my business financials, my steady contracts, and I signed the lease alone. I told Mark his credit was still being verified, but not to worry, I'd handled the deposit. To Beverly, I let her believe her narrative, that her son was the provider, that her influence had secured this palace. For 3 years I paid the toll for our beautiful illusion. I told myself it was love. It was easier than admitting it was the price of keeping Beverly's opinions, and the shadow of her money, outside our gilded door. I was the silent foundation holding everything up, and the frightening truth was, no one in my own life even knew I was the architect. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday afternoon, with the sharp, perfumed click of Beverly's heels on my polished concrete floor. She arrived unannounced, a bouquet of peonies in one hand and a look of glacial appraisal in her eyes. The flowers, I knew, were not a gift for me. They were set dressing, a prop for the performance she was about to give. She wore her usual uniform, a crisp linen shift dress, pearls, and an aura of unshakable authority. "Elena, darling," she said, air kissing near my cheek. "The building smells different. Are they using a new cleaner?" I offered her coffee, which she accepted with a nod toward the sofa, as if granting me permission to sit in my own living room. Mark hovered by the kitchen island, a familiar tension in his shoulders. He always became a boy in his mother's presence, softer, quieter. She took a single deliberate sip of her coffee, placed the cup precisely on a coaster, and folded her hands in her lap. The preamble was over. "I've had the most wonderful news from David and Claire," she began, her voice smooth as poured cream. David was Mark's older brother, the golden child with a stable finance job and a wife who mirrored Beverly's own tastes perfectly. "They're ready to start a family. Finally. It's time." I smiled politely, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It landed with the weight of an anvil. "This city is no place to raise a child in some cramped little walk-up," she continued, waving a dismissive hand as if swatting away the very idea. "They need space, stability, proper light." Her eyes traveled meaningfully around our sun-drenched apartment, claiming it with her gaze. "They need this." Mark shifted his weight. "Mom, what are you?" "It's simple," Beverly interrupted, her focus laser-locked on me. She reached into her leather tote and produced a single sheet of crisp white paper. She slid it across the glass coffee table toward me with one manicured finger. It was a formal notice to vacate, typed and ready. "You've had a lovely run here, Elena. Truly. But it's time you and Mark learned to stand on your own 2 feet. Be adults. This place, it's a family home. It should go to the son who is actually building a proper family. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. I looked at the paper. The date was clear. 30 days. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was infinitely more cruel than any shout. Be a dear and start looking for a little place of your own. Something more appropriate for your budget. She finally looked at Mark, her expression softening into a mask of maternal concern. Don't worry, darling. We'll handle everything on this end. This is for the best. I looked from her triumphant face to Mark's stricken one. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. He was caught as always in the crossfire and he had never learned how to pick up a weapon. I looked back at the notice. Then I looked at Beverly. I didn't pick up the paper. I simply folded my hands in my own lap, mirroring her pose. I understand, I said, my voice perfectly, terrifyingly calm. The word hung in the air between us. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't submission. It was an acknowledgement. A receipt. For the first time, a flicker of something, not doubt but curiosity, passed behind her eyes. She had expected tears, defiance, pleading. She had not expected calm. She had not expected me. The click of the front door closing behind Beverly seemed to echo for a full minute in the vast, silent apartment. Mark finally moved, a puppet with cut strings. He walked to the notice, picked it up as if it were a live wire and stared at it. Elena, he started, his voice a strained whisper. I'm so sorry. We can talk to her. I'll talk to her. He was already formulating the script of his apology to her, the plea for a compromise, a delay. He wasn't thinking about fighting, he was thinking about negotiating our surrender. I didn't look at the paper. I looked at him. The morning light that usually made him look like a romantic painting now just highlighted the panic in his eyes, the helpless set of his jaw. In that moment I didn't see my husband. I saw the conduit through which Beverly's will had flowed into the very center of my life. All the suppressed frustrations of 3 years, the hidden payments, the swallowed comments, the careful curation of a reality where his pride remained intact, rose up in my throat. But it didn't come out as a scream. It solidified into something cold, clear, and absolute. I walked to the kitchen island, the expanse of cold marble between us feeling suddenly symbolic. I placed my palms flat on the surface. Mark, I said, and my tone made him look up from the paper. It held no hysteria, no tears. It was the voice I used with clients when a project timeline was irrevocably broken. This is the only question that matters right now. Do you stand with me? Or do you stand with her? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. It's not that simple, Ellie. He's my mother. She thinks she's helping David. We can find another place, maybe something smaller, and... That's not an answer, I interrupted, my voice still quiet. A we problem requires a we solution. She did not deliver this to us. She delivered it to me. She told me to be a dear and find a little place. She has decided my home is a gift for her other son. So I am asking you, me or her? His mouth opened and closed. I saw the war behind his eyes. A lifetime of conditioning battling against a flicker of marital loyalty. The silence stretched. He looked from me to the notice, to the city skyline that he had never questioned how we afforded. His silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was my answer. I nodded once, a small, final motion. The coldness in my chest spread, a numb, focusing freeze. Hey, I said. I picked up my laptop from the counter, walked to the sofa and sat down. I could feel his confused gaze on my back. He was waiting for the explosion, the tears, the drama. He was braced for a storm. He didn't understand. The storm wasn't coming. The iceberg had just calved. I opened my laptop, navigated through my bookmarks and logged into the resident portal for the Orion Tower. My fingers flew over the keys, precise and unfeeling. I found the tab for lease management. I didn't look at the payment history, that long scroll of my solitary financial devotion. I went straight to terminate lease. The system asked for a reason. I selected other. It asked for a termination date. I input the date, exactly 30 days from today, the last day of Beverly's gracious notice period. A final confirmation screen popped up. Warning: terminating your lease will forfeit your deposit and you will be liable for the premises until this date. Confirm. My finger hovered for only a second. I clicked, confirm. The screen refreshed. A green checkmark appeared. Lease termination request received. In 30 days, apartment 42B would cease to exist. Not just for me. For everyone. Life in the apartment took on a surreal dual quality. On the surface, everything was normal. The sun still rose over the skyline. Mark still painted by the window, though his strokes were agitated, messy. We shared space like polite roommates, the air between us thick with everything we weren't saying. He was waiting for me to break, to fold, to join him in figuring out how to appease his mother. I was busy building a lifeboat. I named my plan Operation Ghost because that's what I would become. A silent, unseen force and then a memory. My first call was to a boutique relocation service, not the usual moving company. Discretion and efficiency are the priorities, I told the manager, Simone. One day in and out. No labels on boxes. Plain, unmarked trucks. I booked them for the morning of day 31, the day after my legal tenancy ended. Then I found my new sanctuary. I didn't look at duplexes or cute little places. I toured a modern, secure building downtown, closer to my studio. The apartment was smaller, a sleek one-bedroom with a balcony and a view of the river. It was mine alone. I signed the lease that afternoon, the deposit a swift, clean transfer from my business account. The quiet of the empty space felt like a promise. The real work began at home. I started with the non-essentials, the things Mark would never notice. Late at night, after he'd fallen into a fitful sleep on the sofa, I would carefully pack my extensive collection of art books, my vintage camera equipment, the porcelain vase my grandmother had brought from Portugal. I used moving blankets and sturdy boxes I had delivered to my new office. My closet was a tactical operation. I slowly, systematically transferred my professional wardrobe, my shoes, my jewelry to garment bags and storage trunks. I left a few everyday items hanging, a ghost of a wardrobe, so the space never looked empty. My expensive skincare, my perfumes, the good linens from the guest closet, all disappeared into boxes marked Studio Archive. I treated my home like a crime scene I was meticulously erasing myself from. Every item that was unequivocally mine, purchased with my money, chosen by my taste, was catalogued and packed. I was unearthing the woman who had lived here, the one who had paid for every thread of the curtain, every spoon in the drawer. Mark was oblivious. He was lost in his own world of guilt and anxiety, having tense, whispered phone calls with his brother David, who I now knew was eagerly awaiting the keys. Mark would look at me sometimes, see me sorting through old files or boxing up books, and assume it was a form of grieving, of reluctantly preparing for the downgrade he believed was inevitable. He never asked where the boxes went. He never noticed the slow thinning of the bookshelves, the emptying of the display cabinet that held my awards and mementos. His blindness was no longer something I protected. It was a tool I used. The final piece was logistics. I met with Carlos, the daytime doorman, a man of impeccable professionalism who had always respected my quiet efficiency. I slipped him a generous envelope along with my old key fob. On the morning of the 1st, I said quietly, a moving team will arrive for 42B. They are authorized by me. After they are done, a woman named Beverly Caldwell will arrive. Please give her this key and this letter from management. He took it all, his expression neutral, but his eyes held a flicker of understanding. He nodded once. Consider it handled, Miss Torres. By day 29, my life in apartment 42B was a hollow shell. My essence was packed away in a storage unit or waiting in a new, quiet space by the river. All that remained was the final act of disappearance. And Mark, painting by the window, hadn't seen a thing. Beverly summoned us for a family dinner on day 28. It was framed as a farewell, a send-off. I knew it was a victory lap. Her home was a monument to tasteful excess. Crystal gleamed, silver shone, and not a single item seemed bought, only inherited or curated. David and Claire were already there, Claire's hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach as if she'd already swallowed the heir to a minor throne. Elena. Mark. Beverly trilled, ushering us in. She kissed Mark's cheek, then turned her impeccable smile to me. It didn't reach her eyes. Come in, come in. We're just celebrating all the wonderful new beginnings. The air was thick with the cloying scent of roasted chicken and unspoken agendas. We took our places at the long mahogany table. I sat calm observing. Mark was a knot of tension beside me. The conversation was a masterclass in passive aggression wrapped in lace. Claire gushed about prenatal vitamins and the importance of natural light for infant development. The research is just compelling, she said, her eyes flicking to David, then to Beverly, who nodded with grave approval. Light is everything, Beverly agreed, sipping her wine. It shapes the mood, the environment. It's why certain spaces just feel right for a family. Her gaze swept over me, waiting for a flinch. David, ever the golden boy, held forth on school districts and property values, speaking with the authority of a man who had never been handed a 30-day notice. The Orion Tower is in the premier catchment zone, of course. It's not just an apartment, it's an investment in a future. Mark pushed his food around his plate. I took a slow sip of water. So, Elena, Beverly said, the spotlight finally landing with full force. Her voice was sweet, syrupy with false concern. Have you and Mark had any luck in your search? I've heard there are some charming little developments on the east side. Very budget-conscious. All eyes turned to me. Claire's smile was a thin mask of pity. David looked politely interested. Mark stared at his plate, his ears turning red. I set my glass down with a soft, precise click. I met Beverly's gaze across the gleaming table. It's all handled, I said, my voice even, a placid lake. The simplicity of the statement threw her. She'd prepared for complaints, for desperate questions, for me to beg for more time. She'd armed herself with a list of humiliating rental suggestions. Handled, she repeated, the sugar in her tone crystallizing. Already? That was quick. I'm efficient, I replied, allowing a small, cool smile. When I see a path forward, I take it. A faint line appeared between her perfectly sculpted brows. My calm was a dissonant note in her symphony of triumph. She couldn't categorize it. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't defiance. It was something else entirely, something that didn't fit her script. Well, she said, recovering, reaching for her wine glass again. I'm glad to hear you're being practical. It's an important quality. The rest of the dinner was a blur of hollow chatter. Claire talked about nursery color palettes, earthy neutrals, nothing garish. David discussed the financial wisdom of their move. Beverly held court, the benevolent monarch redistributing her kingdom. Through it all, I was a statue of calm. I answered questions vaguely. I smiled when required. I watched them build their castle in the air, brick by arrogant brick, on a foundation they didn't know I had already dissolved. When we left, Beverly hugged Mark tightly. It's for the best, darling. You'll see. He gave me a pat on the shoulder, a dismissal. Good luck with the move, dear. Do let me know if you need any boxes. In the elevator down, Mark was quiet. You were so calm in there, he finally mumbled, a note of accusation in his voice, as if my peace was a betrayal of our shared distress. I looked at the descending floor numbers. Was I? The doors opened to the lobby. I stepped out, not waiting for him. The clock was ticking. Their future nursery was now on a 30-day timer, and only 2 of us at that table knew the bomb was already buried in the walls. And I was the only one who knew when it would detonate. Day 31 dawned clear and sharp. The movers, a team of 4 efficient men in unmarked gray uniforms, arrived at 8 a.m. on the dot. Their truck, a plain white van, was parked discreetly in the loading bay. Simone, the relocation manager, met me at the door with a tablet, her demeanor cool and professional. We are clear for a full extraction, Ms. Torres? She asked, her eyes scanning the apartment. Everything that is mine, I confirmed. You have the inventory and the floor plan. The items in the second bedroom, the artist studio, are to be left completely untouched. She gave a sharp nod and directed her team with silent hand gestures. I stood in the center of the living room as the operation began. It was a methodical, almost surgical dismantling of a life. They started with the large furniture. My sleek Italian-made sofa, the one Mark had always said was a bit severe, was wrapped, lifted, and carried out. The glass coffee table, the one Beverly had always been afraid to set a glass on, followed. The bookshelves, now empty of my books, were disassembled and taken. Room by room, my presence was erased. From the bedroom, they took the king-sized bed frame and mattress I'd bought, the elegant dresser, the velvet armchair by the window where I drank my morning coffee. They left Mark's cluttered nightstand, his pile of sketchbooks on the floor. The kitchen was a particular focus. They opened every cabinet. My set of Japanese knives, my copper cookware, the everyday dishes I'd collected from travels. All were carefully packed into custom crates. They left a single chipped mug, a few mismatched plates, and the cheap pots Mark had brought from his bachelor days. The pantry was cleared of everything but half a bag of rice and some stale coffee. Even the tea towels, the oven mitts, the garbage bin, all mine, all gone. They moved with an almost eerie silence, the only sounds the rustle of packing paper, the soft thud of furniture pads, and the low hum of the elevator going up and down. Mark had left early, guiltily muttering about meeting a gallery owner. He couldn't bear to watch, he said. I knew he couldn't bear to face the physical reality of the split his mother had engineered and his silence had endorsed. By noon, the apartment was a cavernous echo chamber. The beautiful rugs were gone, rolled and bound. The art from the walls, my prints, my photographs, was packed, leaving stark pale rectangles on the paint. The lamps, the floor cushions, the throw blankets, even the wireless speakers were gone. They took the shower curtain, the bath mats, the soap dispenser from the en-suite. They unscrewed the high-end light bulbs from the fixtures I'd installed, leaving empty sockets. The final touch was the most symbolic. From the master bedroom closet, they removed the custom alpha shelving system, the entire structure. They left Mark's clothes in a sad heap on the bare closet rod and a few empty wire hangers tinkling in the draft. It looked like the closet of a hotel room, impersonal and transient. Simone did a final walkthrough with me. The apartment was a shell. Sunlight streamed onto bare concrete floors. The city view was unobstructed, almost hostile in its clarity. All that remained was Mark's studio chaos spilling from the second bedroom, and a single cheap folding chair I'd placed in the center of the vast living room. A throne for a king of nothing. Inventory is complete and loaded, Simone said. All items will be in your new residence by 3 p.m. The storage pod with your archival boxes will be delivered to your office warehouse tomorrow. I handed her a final envelope. For your team's discretion and efficiency. She pocketed it with another nod. A pleasure, Miss Torres. We are clear. The team and the van disappeared as quietly as they had come. I took one last look. This wasn't my home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was now just a vacant, high-priced box, soon to be someone else's problem. My phone buzzed. A text from the doorman, Carlos. They are 5 minutes out. Right on schedule. I walked to the lobby. Carlos stood at his post, impeccably neutral. I handed him my key fob, the one that had accessed this building for 3 years, and the thick cream-colored envelope from the property management company. Remember, I said, my voice low. The key and this envelope go only to Beverly Caldwell. No one else. Not her son David. Certainly not my husband. Her. Personally. Understood, Miss Torres, he said, placing them under the concierge desk. Safe travels. I didn't look back. I walked out of the glittering lobby, through the brass-trimmed doors and into the bright, unfeeling sunlight. The white van was already gone, my life transported. I slid into the driver's seat of my own car, which I'd packed with the last personal items earlier that morning. In the rearview mirror, the Orion Tower shrank behind me, a glass needle threading a sky I no longer had to pay for. The folding chair sat alone in the empty space, waiting for its next occupant. And downstairs, Carlos waited with a key that opened nothing but a vault of consequences. My new apartment didn't greet me with a grand city view. It offered something better: silence. The space was smaller, a clean rectangle of polished oak floors and white walls. The river glinted placidly beyond the balcony, a moving strip of silver, not a sprawl of demanding lights. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility, not of Mark's turpentine or Beverly's lingering judgment. The movers had been and gone. My furniture, my bookshelves, my art, all placed exactly as I'd specified in the floor plan I'd emailed Simone. It looked like me. Not a niece. Me. The sofa faced the river, not a television. My desk commanded the best corner light. My grandmother's vase sat on a shelf, finally looking like a treasure, not an accent piece. I walked from room to room, my footsteps the only sound. The quiet was a physical presence, a soft blanket. There was no tension humming in the air, no unspoken argument waiting to detonate. The silence was mine. I owned it. I put the kettle on in my new compact kitchen, opening the correct cabinet on the first try to find my favorite mug. The simple, familiar act felt like a profound victory. My phone, face down on the counter, began to vibrate. Then again. And again. A flurry of tinny buzzes. I didn't need to look to know the source. The clock had struck. The performance was over. I poured the hot water over the tea leaves and watched it steep, the colors swirling and deepening. The buzzing stopped, then started again in a persistent, frantic rhythm. Let it ring. Let it buzz. Let the hive I'd left behind swarm in its confusion. When the tea was ready, I took it to the balcony. The afternoon sun was warm on my skin. I took a slow, deep breath. The air here was different, lighter, easier to pull into my lungs. I picked up my phone. Not to answer the calls, but to send one final message. I scrolled past the dozen missed calls from Mark, the several from unknown numbers likely belonging to David or Beverly, and opened a new text to my husband. I typed the address of my new building. Nothing else. Just the numbers and the street name. Feck. Then on a new line I added the only explanation he would get from me now. Your mother has the key to your future. I hit send. I placed the phone back on the glass table, screen down. I took a sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through me. Inside, the empty, silent apartment was a blank canvas. Outside, the river flowed steadily, going somewhere new. For the first time in a very long time, so was I. Beverly arrived at the Orion Tower at 11 a.m., a study in triumphant charity. David and Claire flanked her, Claire practically vibrating with excited energy. They were a procession of inheritance. Beverly carried a folder of fabric swatches and paint samples for the nursery. David held a tape measure, already discussing where to put a home office. "Good morning, Carlos," Beverly said, her voice ringing with proprietary warmth in the hushed lobby. "We're here for 42B. My son is expecting us." Carlos, from behind the polished concierge desk, offered his usual impassive nod. "Miss Caldwell." He didn't reach for a key. He didn't call up. Instead, he bent down and retrieved two items: the single familiar key fob I had given him and a thick cream-colored business envelope. He held them out to Beverly. "For you." Beverly's perfectly sculpted brow furrowed, just for an instant. A flicker of impatience. She took the items, a bemused smile playing on her lips. "Oh, is this from the management? How thoughtful. Probably just some transfer paperwork." She slipped the key fob into her purse and tried to hand the envelope to David. "Darling, you handle this." "The instructions were specific, ma'am," Carlos interjected, his tone respectful but firm. "The envelope is for you. Personally." The slight emphasis on the last word made her pause. Her smile tightened. "Very well." She slid a manicured finger under the flap and tore it open. She pulled out a covering letter on the building's official letterhead and a smaller, sealed packet beneath it. David and Claire hovered, their excited chatter dying down as they watched her face. Her eyes scanned the letter. The triumphant glow on her cheeks began to drain, replaced by a slow-rising pallor. Her lips, painted a confident rose, parted slightly. "What is it, Mom?" David asked, his tape measure forgotten. Beverly didn't answer. She was rereading the letter, her eyes darting back to the top as if hoping she'd misread the salutation. She fumbled with the smaller packet, breaking the seal. It contained a formal lease termination notice for apartment 42B, signed by me, effective as of yesterday. And beneath that, a crisp, new rental application form for the now vacant apartment. Attached to the application was a post-it note from the property manager in neat, bureaucratic handwriting. Per the terms of the vacated lease, the unit is available for new tenancy. First month, last month, and security deposit must be submitted with a completed application for consideration. Total due upon application, $16,800. Please submit to our main leasing office. The number seemed to vibrate on the page. $16,800. "No," Beverly whispered, the word a dry leaf of sound. "This is a mistake." "What's a mistake?" Claire's voice was sharp with sudden anxiety. "Mom, what does it say?" Beverly finally looked up, her eyes wide, her composure cracking at the edges. She wasn't looking at her children. She was staring past them at the bank of elevators, as if the reality of the situation was a physical blow arriving from that direction. "The apartment," she stammered, her voice losing its melodic certainty. It's not." "What about the apartment?" David's voice took on a demanding tone. He snatched the papers from her trembling hands. His eyes raced over the words. His face, so like his mother's, mirrored her shock, then hardened into confusion, then dawning, ugly understanding. Terminated? Vacant? What the hell does this mean? Where is all their stuff? Where is Mark? Beverly found her voice, but it was thin, stretched tight with panic. The key, she said, turning back to Carlos, a desperate command in her tone. Give me the key. I need to see the apartment. Carlos merely gestured with an open hand toward the elevators, his expression unchanged. The key you hold is the only one for that unit currently in the building, ma'am. Clutching the damning papers in one hand and the useless key fob in the other, Beverly turned and strode toward the elevators, David and Claire scrambling after her, their earlier excitement replaced by a baffled, fearful silence. The triumphant procession had fractured. The grand gift-giver now held only a bill and a key to an empty box. The elevator doors slid shut on their stunned faces. Carlos adjusted his tie, a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction in his otherwise professional gaze. The first domino had fallen, and it had landed directly on Beverly Caldwell's perfectly coiffed head. In my quiet apartment by the river, the only sounds were the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant whisper of traffic from the bridge. I had unpacked my kettle and my favorite mug. The simple, familiar ritual of making tea in my new space felt like a sacrament of calm. I placed the steaming mug on the balcony table and sat down, wrapping my hands around its warmth. The river moved with a constant, soothing purpose below. Then the buzzing started. It began as a single, persistent vibration against the glass tabletop. Then another. And another. The screen of my phone lit up, flashing with Mark's name, his contact photo. A picture I'd taken of him laughing in better days. Now a jarring, frantic beacon in the piece. I let it ring out. The silence returned for a mere 5 seconds before the phone lit up again. Unknown caller. Then again. Unknown caller. The hive was awake and it was furious. I took a slow sip of my tea, the bergamot and honey blooming on my tongue. I watched the screen. After the 4th call went to voicemail, the text notifications began to pop up, one after another, a staccato burst of digital panic. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. The tone was in the frequency, the desperate repetition. Finally, I picked up the phone. Not to answer, but to open the voicemail screen. I put it on speaker and set it back down. I pressed play on the first message. Mark's voice, breathless, strained, almost unrecognizable. Elena? Elena, pick up. What is going on? I'm at the apartment. The apartment is empty. Everything is gone. My mom is here and she's losing her mind. There's some letter from management. What did you do? Call me back. Now. Beep. The next message. Beverly's voice, sharp, shattering its usual controlled melody. Elena. This is Beverly. There seems to be a catastrophic misunderstanding. You need to get down here and explain this to the management immediately. This is not a game. My family is here. Fix this. Beep. Another from Mark, higher-pitched, fraying at the edges. The doorman says you gave him a key and a letter for Mom. Elena, talk to me. Where are you? Where's all our stuff? Did you get robbed? Why would you? Beep. A new voice, male, tight with anger. David. Elena, it's David. I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, but you have 5 minutes to call my mother back and clear this up. You're embarrassing yourself and causing a huge scene. Beep. Back to Beverly, the ice in her voice now melted into pure, unadulterated panic. The leasing office says the termination is valid. They say the application requires a deposit. Elena, if this is about the notice, we can talk. But you cannot do this to David and Claire. You cannot do this to me. Me. I took another sip of tea, the warmth a stark contrast to the cold fear pouring from my phone's speaker. The messages were a symphony of unraveling control. The confusion, the anger, the dawning horror. It was all there, a perfect chaotic melody. I finished my tea as the last message played out. A final ragged call from Mark, just my name, a whispered broken question. Ellie, why? I deleted the entire voicemail inbox. I swiped away the string of unread text notifications. I blocked all the unknown numbers. Then I sat back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the new clean silence of my own domain wash over me again. The buzzing had stopped. The hive was in disarray, but it was far away in a hollow tower I no longer owned. My phone was once again just a quiet piece of glass and metal. For the first time in years it felt like mine. The piece lasted 3 hours. It was broken by a pounding that was not digital but physical, a frantic, insistent hammering on my new front door. I knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. Mark stood in the hallway, his face pale, his hair a wild mess from running his hands through it. The artist's carefully cultivated dishevelment had curdled into genuine distress. He looked like a stranger who'd just survived a shipwreck. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door and opened it. I didn't open it wide. I stood in the frame, a barrier between his chaos and my calm. "Elena," he gasped, his eyes wild, trying to see past me into the apartment. "What is happening?" I went to the apartment and it's a shell. There's nothing left but my junk and a folding chair. My mother is having a complete meltdown at the leasing office. David is yelling at me. There's a bill for $16,000. His words tumbled out in a frantic, accusatory heap. "You moved," I stated, my voice flat. "You moved everything," he cried, his voice cracking. "Without telling me. You left me in an empty apartment with my mother screaming about money. How could you be so cruel?" That word hung in the space between us. It seemed to give him a footing, a moral high ground he desperately needed. I didn't raise my voice. "Cruelty is subjective, Mark. Your mother handing me an eviction notice to gift my home to your brother wasn't cruel? You sitting in silence while she did it wasn't cruel?" He flinched, but the anger was too strong. "That's different. He's family. She was trying to help David start a family. We could have talked about it, found a solution together. Instead you just nuked everything. Where did all our money go? Our savings? How are we supposed to get a new place now?" There was. The heart of his panic laid bare. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about us. It was about the sudden, terrifying vacuum where his security used to be. I looked at him, this man I had loved, and felt a profound, final detachment. He was still asking the wrong questions. "Mark," I said, my voice so quiet he had to stop his rant to hear it. "Sit down." I gestured to a small bench I'd placed in the hallway for putting on shoes. He stared at it, then at me, bewildered by the domesticity of the command amidst the crisis. He sank onto it, deflated. I remained standing, leaning against my doorframe, my arms folded. I was the teacher now. He was the student who had failed the most important test. "You asked where our money went," I began, each word deliberate, ice-cold and clear. "There was no our money. Not for the apartment. Not for the furniture. Not for the life we lived in that tower." He opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a single hand. It silenced him. "For 3 years, Mark. 3 years. On the first of every month, $5,600 left my business account and paid the rent for apartment 42B. Every lamp, every spoon, every thread of that ridiculous rug you loved. The deposit. The utilities in my name. The entire beautiful shining lie of our life up there was funded by me." His face went from pale to ashen. His eyes searched mine, looking for the joke, the hysteria, the exaggeration. He found only stark, unadorned truth. "You paid," he whispered, the words barely audible. "But," Mom said, "I thought. You thought what your mother wanted you to think," I finished for him. "That her son was the provider. That her influence secured it. You never asked. You never looked at a single bill. You were a guest, Mark. A cherished, beloved guest in a home I paid for. And your mother wasn't reclaiming it for family. She was trying to evict me from my own property." He stared at the floor of the hallway, his shoulders slumping as the weight of it, the sheer magnitude of his obliviousness, crushed down on him. The financial truth was a wrecking ball, and it had just swung directly into the foundation of his entire reality. The angry husband was gone. In his place was a lost, hollowed-out boy, finally beginning to glimpse the cost of the ticket he'd never known he had. The silence in the hallway was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of a distant elevator. Mark sat on the bench, his head in his hands, his earlier fury collapsed into a stunned, vibrating stillness. I didn't move from the doorway. The space between us felt vast, a chasm carved by 3 years of my silence and his willful blindness. He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. 5,600? He repeated, the number a foreign, monstrous thing. "A month." "Yes," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "It was just data now. Multiply that by 36 months, Mark. Do the math. He blinked, his mind visibly struggling with the arithmetic of betrayal. That's over $200,000, he breathed, the magnitude dawning like a sickening sunrise. 201,600, I confirmed. Not including utilities, furnishings, maintenance. That was just the rent. The toll for the view. He shook his head, a slow, denialist motion. But my freelance work. The money I gave you for bills. You gave me variable amounts when you remembered, I said, cutting him off. It covered groceries sometimes. It bought dinner. It never touched the edges of the real expense. Kept the spreadsheets, Mark. I can show you the bank transfers. Every single one from my business account, Torres Design Studio LLC, to Orion Tower Holdings. You never saw them because you never looked. The color had drained completely from his face. He looked like he might be sick. Why? The word was a raw scrape of sound. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you tell me? At first, I said, a humorless smile touching my lips. To protect you. Your pride was a fragile, precious thing. Your mother had always been your safety net, and the thought of her knowing you needed help. I thought I was being your wife. I thought I was building our castle. I paused, letting the bitter irony of it hang in the air. And then as time went on, it became a habit. A convenient fiction. It was easier to pay the money than to have the hard conversation. Easier to let you play the successful artist than to force you to face the balance sheet of our life. And your mother. My voice hardened. Her assumption was the perfect shield. As long as she believed she was still the patron, she stayed at a distance. I paid a premium for that distance. Mark's gaze was fixed on the geometric pattern of the hallway carpet, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing 3 years of conversations, of assumptions, of his own casual disregard for the practical mechanics of our world. She didn't know, he mumbled, more to himself than to me. She really didn't know. Of course she didn't, I said, the chill returning to my voice. She operates on narrative, not facts. Her narrative was that her son was thriving, that her lineage was securing this luxury. The truth, that her son's wife was quietly bankrolling everything, would have shattered her entire worldview. And you, I finally let the full force of my disappointment show. You were so happy in the narrative, you never bothered to check the footnotes. He flinched as if struck. You keep asking why I did this, I said, gesturing vaguely to encompass the move, the termination, the bombshell I'd just delivered. I didn't do anything, Mark. I simply stopped. I stopped paying. I stopped pretending. I stopped protecting you from the reality you were too comfortable to question. I leaned forward slightly, my words dropping to a devastating finality. She didn't want you to have a wife. She wanted you to have a caretaker. A curator for the life she imagined for you. And for 3 years you let me play the part. The only difference now is that I've left the stage and the lights have come on. You're finally seeing the set for what it always was. A very expensive illusion. I straightened up, the lesson concluded. The financial audit was complete. The balance was zero. Mark didn't have a rebuttal. The financial facts were a wall he couldn't scale, a language he'd never bothered to learn. He sat on that hallway bench for a long minute, the fight utterly drained from him, replaced by a dazed, hollow understanding. Finally he stood. He moved slowly like an old man. She's going to blame me, he said, his voice a monotone. It wasn't an accusation toward me anymore. It was a simple, dreadful prediction. Yes, I agreed. There was no comfort to offer. She will. He looked at me then, a last searching glance, as if hoping to find some remnant of the woman who would soften this for him, who would help him spin a new story for his family. He found only the calm, unyielding architect of this new reality. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the elevators, his shoulders slumped under a weight he was only beginning to feel. The ripple effects of the detonation reached me in fragments over the next few days, relayed through the strained, gossipy channels of what was left of our mutual social circle and in Mark's own scattered, late-night texts that I no longer answered. A friend from the art district messaged. Saw Mark at the coffee shop. He looks wrecked. Heard his mom caused some huge scene at the Orion. Something about an apartment? Through a former colleague who was still friendly with David's wife, Claire, I heard the other side. The story was a chaotic, self-serving jumble. Beverly apparently had spent hours at the leasing office, her voice rising to operatic heights of indignation before finally collapsing into tearful, confused bargaining. She had tried to pull every string, name-drop every acquaintance, but faced with the cold legal fact of my terminated lease and the building's standard policy, she had no leverage. The manager had been politely immovable. David, the golden child, was reportedly furious, not at the situation but at his mother. The promise of the perfect pied terra had vaporized, replaced by public humiliation and a 5-figure bill. According to the gossip, he'd yelled at Beverly in the lobby, asking how she could have been so stupid, so presumptuous, to think she could just gift an apartment she didn't own. The grandchild plan was suddenly on shakier ground, wrapped in arguments about financial imprudence. Beverly's social armor had cracked. The story of her triumphant redistribution of family resources had curdled into a tale of her own profound miscalculation. She was reportedly indisposed, avoiding her usual rounds of lunches and charity committees. The Queen had overplayed her hand and her court was whispering. Mark's texts were the bleakest bulletins. David isn't speaking to Mom. He says I should have controlled you. That I let this happen. They think I knew about the money. They think I'm a liar or an idiot. Probably both. The family unit, bound so tightly by Beverly's will and a shared sense of entitlement, was fracturing along the fault lines I had exposed. The pressure they had always directed outward had turned inward. The blame swirled among them. Beverly's arrogance, David's greed, Mark's passivity, a toxic cyclone in their once impervious world. I read these updates with a detached curiosity. I had pulled one thread, the truth of the rent, and the entire gilded tapestry of their collective narrative was unraveling. The fallout was theirs to manage. The storm was finally raging in their house, not mine. And in my quiet apartment by the river, there was only peace, and the satisfying distant sound of a carefully constructed fantasy collapsing under the weight of its own assumptions. A week after the empty apartment revelation, Mark returned. This time there was no pounding. Just a soft, hesitant knock, like a stranger asking for directions. I opened the door. He looked worse. The artistic dishevelment had solidified into genuine neglect. Shadows pooled under his eyes. He held a small paper bag from the bakery I used to love. I brought you a Pinot chocolate, he said, the offering feeble, a relic from a script we no longer followed. I didn't take the bag. Thank you, but I don't eat that anymore. The rejection hung in the air. He lowered the bag, his shoulders slumping further. Can I come in, please? Just to talk. I considered it, then stepped aside. Not an invitation to comfort, but to witness. He entered my new world, his eyes darting around, taking in the clean lines, the intentional space, the undeniable imprint of a single specific person. My imprint. It seemed to unsettle him more than the empty apartment had. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the living room looking lost. I've been staying with a friend, he began. My studio stuff is in storage. Mom, she's not well. David and Claire are looking at apartments in a completely different neighborhood. It's a mess. I'm aware, I said, leaning against my kitchen counter, maintaining the distance. Elena, he said, his voice thickening. He took a step forward, his hands spread in a plea. We can fix this. I see it now. I was blind. I was an idiot. She was wrong, so wrong. We can get counseling. We can start over somewhere small, just us. For real this time. I'll get a steady job, I'll contribute, I'll... Stop. The word was not loud, but it was final. It cut through his rambling fantasy like a blade. He froze. There is no fix, Mark, I said, my voice weary of the entire conversation. A vase is broken, you glue it. A foundation is poured wrong, the whole house has to come down. You poured our foundation on a lie. The lie that you were building with me. You weren't. You were just living in the house I built. I can change, he insisted, a desperate light in his eyes. I can learn. The time for you to learn was 3 years ago, I replied, unmoved. Or 2 years ago. Or last month when you saw the tension in my shoulders every time your mother called. Or the day before graduation when you told me not to rock the boat with David. Or an hour before she handed me that notice when you could have said, this is our home and this is not acceptable. I pushed off from the counter, standing straight. You had 1,000 moments to choose me, Mark. To choose us as a unit against the world. In every single one of them, you chose the path of least resistance. You chose her narrative. You chose your comfort. You chose silence. Tears welled in his eyes, but they sparked no sympathy in me. They were tears for his own consequences, not for my pain. This isn't about change, I said, walking to the door and opening it. The message was clear. This is about consequence. You made a choice. Actually, you made 1,000 small choices that added up to one big one. And this, you standing here homeless with your family in chaos, is the natural, logical, and entirely predictable result. He stared at the open door, then back at me, the last of his hope draining away. He saw no crack in my resolve, no softness to exploit. So that's it, he whispered. That's it, I confirmed. The fix was you choosing me. You never did. This is what never looks like. He walked past me, the paper bag still clutched in his hand. He paused on the threshold, a broken man on the border of my new country. I loved you, he said, a final weak appeal to history. I met his gaze, my own clear and dry. I know, I said. But love without action is just a sentiment. And sentiments don't pay the rent. I closed the door. The soft, definitive click of the lock was the period at the end of our sentence. 1 year has a way of sanding down sharp edges and painting over faded spaces. The raw, angry wound of the separation scabbed over, then scarred and finally faded to a faint line, a memory of a pain that no longer hurt. My life in that year expanded. Caldwell Financial Transitions, the consultancy I dreamed of while staring out at a skyline I paid for, was no longer a dream. It was a thriving reality. I'd traded the corporate ladder for my own firm, specializing in helping women untangle the financial webs left by divorces, deaths, and fresh starts. My first clients were those 2 women from the art district. Now I had a waiting list. The work was deeply, profoundly satisfying. I was needed for my mind, my strategy, my calm in a crisis. Not for my ability to quietly fund a fantasy. My apartment by the river became a home. Plants thrived on the balcony. The bookshelves were full of books I actually wanted to read. The silence was no longer just an absence of noise, but a presence I cherished. I traveled for the first time in years, not to cater to someone else's itinerary, but to places whose names I'd only whispered. A solo trip to Portugal, a design conference in Copenhagen. I came back filled with ideas, not exhaustion. I dated casually. A witty architect, a soft-spoken professor. Nothing serious, and that was the point. I was rediscovering my own tastes, my own rhythms, without the static of someone else's expectation or a mother-in-law's silent critique. Amelia visited often, bursting with pride. "Look at you, Mom," she'd say, flopping onto my sofa. "You're literally the coolest person I know." The news from the old world reached me in occasional distant echoes. A mutual friend over coffee mentioned she'd run into Mark. "He's living in his mother's guest house," she said, her voice tinged with pity she didn't need to spare on my account. "Trying to get his art career going again, but it's slow." Beverly sold some jewelry, I heard. To help David with a down payment on a condo. Something much smaller out in the suburbs. I nodded, sipping my coffee. There was no schadenfreude, no fiery satisfaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement of cause and effect. The scales had balanced. The life they had tried to commandeer had been built on my currency. When I withdrew the funds, their economy collapsed. The woman who had silently paid $5,600 a month to keep the peace was gone. In her place was someone lighter, stronger, more vividly herself. The peace I had now wasn't bought with monthly installments. It was earned, built day by day on a foundation of my own making. The view from my balcony wasn't as high, but it was infinitely clearer. I could finally see all the way to the horizon. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. The secrecy. The financial burden I carried alone for so long. I don't. That secrecy was a cage I built for myself, thinking it was protection. For him. For us. But you cannot protect someone from a reality they refuse to see. You can only postpone the crash. What I learned in that empty apartment, standing amid the echoes of a life I'd funded but never fully owned, was this. The most powerful, radical thing a woman can do is to stop quietly paying for a life someone else is dictating. When I stopped paying that rent, I wasn't just leaving a luxury address. I was evicting their expectations from my life. I was foreclosing on the narrative that my value was in what I could facilitate for others. The space I created when I walked out wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, financial. And in that clean, empty space I finally found the most valuable asset of all. The unshakable title to my own self. That space. That freedom. It's priceless.